Warning: the Mended Futures podcast contains stories told by guests that may be sensitive to some people. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. The opinions expressed by guests do not reflect the views of the hosts and/or producers of this podcast.
On this week's episode, we were joined by Jeff Nitz, who's the Chief Operations Officer of FIVE18 Family Services. You might COO, the coup, if you will. You might recognize his name from previous episodes, whether from Mr. Day or Claudia or Jim Heron, about, things getting nitzed, someone poking holes, asking questions. This is him.
So today we got to hear more about his role as a husband, a father of biological children and foster adoptive children, and his long career supporting kids and families in child welfare. We hope you enjoy.
I discovered something today about my co-host, Allison, and it would mean a lot to me if you would come clean and be honest about who you are to the audience.
Allison was not my first name. My first name was Marcia.
And you changed it.
I did.
Legally.
Right. Because everyone, when they found out that that was my government-given first name, said the Brady Bunch thing. Marcia.
Mm-hmm. You're very brave for taking your future into your own hands.
Yes.
Anyways.
So now that we know that. Yes, so now that we know that.
Today we have Jeff Nitz.
Hey, good to be here.
Is that your real name?
It is.
Okay.
Is it Jeffrey?
It's Jeffrey,
okay.
Not E-R-Y, R-E-Y.
Okay.
Important to remember that.
Yes, very important.
Yes. People misspell it all the time. But so where Allison?
I think my parents knew that that's what they wanted to call me, and
so
they
it was
couldn't.
your middle name,
right? But they couldn't figure out a middle name to go with it. I don't know, but it comes with a lot of complications when you don't go by your first name.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it's taken years for me to get through that.
Got it.
It's your mended future.
That's right. It is.
She's so brave.
So who are you, Jeff Nitz?
I'm me.
Yes. Thank you for being here. And that we're good.
Right.
That's right. That's a really big question. What are you asking with that? Who am I?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it could be, who are you as a person? What's your title?
Oh, okay.
What roles do you have?
Sure. There was a time where I would say I'm a dad, and at that juncture in my life, and I think still probably, I was a dad. I was an adopted dad. I was a bio dad. I was a dad-in-law. I am a dad-in-law. All those things are still true about me. So that plays a pretty significant, that's a big kind of role for me. But here at FIVE18, I serve as the Chief Operating Officer. Which means I don't do any operating on anybody. Really, I don't.
He's a surgeon.
You're a surgeon. Dr. Jeff Nitz. Almost.
Right. That may be soon enough. Yeah, we'll get to that. But operations, right? Kind of the back shop stuff to help the organization become all that it needs to be as an organization. I like making sure that stuff happens really well, minimize friction, enable better effectiveness and efficiency as an organization. That stuff's really important. Yeah. Boring, but it's exciting for me.
It's completely important. I don't know that this organization would still exist if it weren't for your leadership and your role. So thank you for all that you do.
Sure.
Tell us about your journey to FIVE18 Family Services.
Yeah. I think I'm going to start back in college. All right. So I grew up in a family that health services figured prominently in my family. So my dad was a physical therapist. I had an older brother, 11 years older than me, that was a orthopedic surgeon. Speaking of being a surgeon, right? Another older brother who had his doctorate, and he was a physical therapist. Just and a younger brother that's a doctor. And so that's where I thought I was going. My older brother was kind of at that time, kind of my model, right? That's who I wanted to be like him. And I liked health sciences. I liked bio, chemistry, all those things. But in my freshman year, I was doing well academically, but I was in the middle of a chemistry lab when I had this epiphany, and I realized I'm pursuing becoming a doctor, a medical doctor, because of my older brother. And it was like God just turned on the light bulbs and this conclusion that maybe I wasn't made to do that. Maybe I have different strengths and different gifts. I'm trying to be like Polly, but I'm Jeff. And it was one of those, kind of times, right? And I would just, an epiphany. And out of that, I ended up, I had been taking some psych classes, and I remember thinking, this is really cool stuff. And my interest was very much about learning about how we operate, how we think and view our worlds, make sense of our worlds. And so I ended up changing my major from bio to psychology, and that ended up being a really pivotal point for me, right? So I ended up with my psych degree. Thought I was going to go get my PhD in clinical psychology. Everything was lined up for that. Took my GREs, had my all my support from my professors in where I went to college, and but I was going to take a year off, get married, save a little money before I went back and pursued my doctorate. Looked at different doctoral programs. We moved from Illinois. I grew up in a small farming town in Illinois. Moved to Philadelphia, where my wife was from. Not too many human services positions in small farming towns. And I ended up taking a job kind of on a lark to be a foster care social worker. And I thought, I'm not going to like this. It was like, all right, I'll do it kind of thing. And but I ended up taking it, starting that job, and it just rocked my world. Working with the kids, their families, their foster families, their bio families, trying to make sense of this crazy system in Philadelphia where I had way too many kids. I was there when where the significant drug issues were, crack cocaine was hitting, and oh my gosh, there were just lots and lots of kids that were coming into care, overwhelmed the system. And so I ended up staying in that. Interestingly enough, when I was going to college, there was a guy who came into one of my classes, my developmental psych class. He talked about an MSW, a master's in social work, and he ended up describing that as being in a very marketable degree and all the things that you could do. And I was like, yeah, it's not for me. But the seed had been planted. Interestingly enough, that organization that I first worked with in Philadelphia for 9.5 years, they paid for me to get my MSW. I paid for my first couple of classes, but they took care of the rest of it, which is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
To have somebody else pay you for your master's program.
That's a huge deal.
It's a huge deal. So I came out of my master's program. I had loans for my undergrad, but not for my master's program. And so I stayed in child welfare social work. Went from, again, working in that organization, having great opportunities, and then moving to another more international organization that worked in the child welfare space, and had opportunity after opportunity to develop neat things within that organization, and ended up in senior leadership there until November of 2016. When Claudia gave me a call. Claudia had been somebody I had hired in that organization. She had worked for us for a number of years, and but then she had the audacity to leave and come to, at that point, Patrick Henry Family Services. And I was like, "Why are you doing that?
She had some nerve.
Right? Why would you want to move to Lynchburg, Virginia?
In Virginia,
right? What's the point of that?" But she gave me a call at a time when I was one of the few times I'd worked in the organization for 21.5 years at that point. So I was deeply ensconced in that organization. And, but it was one of the few times where I felt like, I think maybe God was releasing me from continuing to work there. She asked me, are you open to possibly considering a role in another organization? And I said, maybe. And she said at that point she knew. as Claudia would want to say, that I would be heading to, at that point, Patrick Henry Family Services. And so that's how I got here.
Wow. I know I didn't realize that you spent that much time as a social worker, as a practitioner, on the ground in the river.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. And I didn't tell you, the other dad roles, foster dad, respite care dad, right? Adoptive dad, all those other dads. So, yeah, we've been involved in this for a long time. In fact, a year from now will be 40 years that I've served in the child welfare field.
Wow.
So a few decades.
Thank you for your service.
Seriously.
Sure.
What advice do you have for people who feel called to and want to pursue a long endurance stretch of a career in the welfare space?
Persevere, right? Yeah, there's going to be hard days and months and maybe even years. But the best stories that God weaves and tells are the ones that are over years and decades. And so just hang in there. And I think we want instant results, right? With Instagram and all the kinds of things that we see. And we want things now. But there's something to be told about what happens when you stay committed over long periods of time. So that's... and I think there's, you have to realize you only have, the spheres of influence that you have, right? I'm gonna do everything I can do within the sphere of influence that I have, right? But I don't control other people's lives. People are going to make choices that may not be the healthiest, best, but I can do what I can do to bring health or the best chance of healthy choices by other people. But I have to accept the reality that I'm not God, and other people are going to make choices. And I have to live and accept those things. The more I fight against that kind of stuff, the more stress I experience, right? Now, one of those kind of lessons over life that we all have to figure out, right? So.
And you still supervise interns.
I do.
Correct?
I do.
And you're still licensed. So you're still working with people who are entering the field.
Yeah. That's my little way of giving back to the field. I teach one little course through LU as well, is my way of saying this is how you can be successful, I think, and deal with a challenging field within social work. Social work is all these little federated kind of areas, right? But within the field of child welfare, this is how you can make a difference over time, all right? And how you can succeed, hang in there, right? Not burn out. Those are things I feel like I can share with brand new students coming into the field.
So speaking of burnout, talk about the chapter or chapters that you're getting ready to close. Something monumental will happen to you soon.
Yeah. So after 5.5 years, I'm almost done with the doctoral program that I started back in June of 2019. Can you believe it? Oh gosh. So a lot of coursework, and the last year has been working on my dissertation, and that focuses on burnout, specifically for child welfare social workers, people who are in the field, and it looks at a number of factors that contribute to and also may mitigate or prevent burnout, because there's a high prevalence, right? There's been a lot of research that has shown that people that come into the field burn out. You have these folks that want to commit to working with society's perhaps most vulnerable citizens, kids that have been harmed, abused, neglected by families. And they're the ones, the workers are the ones who are burning out and don't have a lot to give in support of these kids and their families. And in my mind, that should not be. So trying to tease apart what contributes to and what may prevent burnout for those social workers has been what my study is all about. And I was really blessed to have the Commonwealth of Virginia say that I could survey their DHS workers across the Commonwealth, which was quite a blessing. I had 2 other nonprofit organizations agree to be part of this too. But yeah, we're going to have some really interesting data to share about what contributes to and what prevents burnout. among the population that I care a lot about.
Yeah, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, it's not done yet. I've got a little while to go, but I'm hoping by the end of March I'll be done.
Hey,
so
you've done the vast majority at this point.
At this point, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And can you even anticipate what that will feel like
the
to
euphoria
be done?
Cheryl and I talk about AD after dissertation in life and how we're going to spend all this extra discretionary time that we've not had. Both Cheryl and I have been going through this process together, which in some respects made it easier, right? Because we're both going through it at the same time, and we know we come home, we have dinner together, talk a little bit, and then we separate.
Your wife is going through a doctoral program as well.
Right. She'll finish up hopefully in April.
That's a smart idea to do it at the same time. That's a really good accountability.
It really is. Yeah. Exactly. Right. There's been times where it's like, oh, I'm ready to throw in the towel and she's not. And there's times where she's ready to throw in the towel and I'm not. And it kind of, thank goodness it never happened at the same time. Right. Otherwise, who knows what would happen. But yeah, we're just about ready to wrap it up here this semester.
That's beautiful because there are so many times through a process that you think, nobody knows what this feels like. It can be really lonely.
Oh, yeah.
And you're step by step going through it with someone that you love and you trust. And wow, that's neat.
Well, and it can be hard on a marriage, right?
Absolutely.
When only one person is going through, because you're like almost married to this dissertation, right?
Yes.
For years, right? And that can be really hard on a marriage. But we've been each other's cheerleaders through this process, and that's worked out pretty well.
Do you have your doctorate? You do, right? What was your dissertation on?
Women in leadership in K-12.
That's awesome. What's Cheryl's on?
It's about how social work students, gosh, I've changed it a couple times. It's how social work students, how they've been able to, their attachment style, and how they've been able to overcome traumatic experiences, and how that then relates to their anxiety and depression levels. But specifically, it relates to if you have somebody who helped you walk through a painful traumatic experience, frankly, that's what we do, what we care about here at FIVE18, right?
Absolutely.
If you can have somebody walk through a painful experience, it increases your resilience and be able to overcome some of those things. And so that's what she's looking at among social work students, because she's the chair of the social work department.
Very cool.
Wow.
Yeah. It's sort of a relatively unseen population of people. So it's cool that you guys are sort of giving back and diving deep into that community.
Yeah. That's the point. Yeah.
You have mentioned that you are a biological father, a foster father, an adoptive father. Where did your foster and adoption experiences fall into your work as a social worker? Did the social work come first and that was your exposure to the space?
That's right.
Cool.
Yeah. So both my wife and I were at that point were involved in foster care social work. And by doing that, right, you come across kids that need respite care, right, and foster families. And so we ended up feeling like that was something we needed to do as well. And both of us had kids on our caseloads that were coming towards adoption, or we'd been doing foster care and respite care for different kids over time. And two of those kids, the goal was going to change to adoption, that we had been involved with pretty substantially, and there wasn't a family to adopt either of those two girls. And so our first daughter came to us when she was 4, and then we adopted her right before she turned 5. And then we had a daughter born to us. That was something Cheryl and I wrestled with quite a while, is, gosh, we see all these kids. Again, Philadelphia was overwhelmed with kids. I mean, just so many kids that needed families. And we personally wrestled with, should we make kids when there's so many kids that need families right here, right? And there again, a lot of prayer and discussion about that. So we ended up, after adopting our first daughter, who came to us when she was, again, 5, we had a daughter born to us, and then our older daughter came to us when she was 13, and is in foster care. And then our son was born to us. So kind of a back and forth. And people say, how did they come to you? It's like, yeah, but you wouldn't know it by their ages,
Right.
right? How they all came to us. The 13-year-old, we didn't adopt until she was almost 21.
Wow.
Kind of a long story there for her. It would take too long here to share it. And it's more her story than ours, to share that. But crazy blessed by every one of those kids, right? Each in their own way have blessed Cheryl and I. And we've learned so much from them. I would have said, before I was married, I knew how to love well. Marriage teaches you what it means to die to self. And then you have kids. And then you learn, oh my gosh, right? And one of our kids was very severely attachment compromised because of terrible, awful abuse and neglect that played out for her. And boy, it was hard. I mean, it was just messy, hard. Here we go again, right? I mean, it's just ongoing, right? And it's not one of those things where you just have a moment and we have this breakthrough and everything's perfect. It's like, wow, this is day-to-day hard. And I have so much appreciation for families that hang in there day in, day out, right? Whether you're fostering or adopting kids, where there's those challenges, where it makes total sense where a child says, I'm not going to trust you. It makes no sense to trust big people based on what my experience in life has taught me. So it makes total sense why kids would do that, right? But to continue to persevere in love in the messy and hard places with a kid, boy, I have a lot of appreciation. And I mean, Cheryl and I, there's other families that had it more difficult than what we did. But boy, that was a learning lesson for us. And I'm glad we went through that, right? Now I can say that. At the time, it was like, why God? This is crazy hard. But
how was it for you to work in the child welfare space and to live it out in your own home? Did you feel like you could balance that? Or, I mean, obviously now after the fact, it gives you a deeper appreciation, like you just said.
Yeah.
But were there times where you felt like you were going to burn out more because you were working it and living it?
Oh yeah. 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 I think that was hard to get away. I remember some of our colleagues wanted to go out and watch various movies that dealt with the child welfare system. It's like, no, we don't want our entertainment to be about that too. We're living this day in, day out. We're coming home to it. I mean, to be real honest, there was a time where I thought I didn't want to come home from work. That work is, in spite of some of the demands and challenges that were there, I knew it would be even more in my face and more stressful the moment I would get home, because we kind of did a tag team thing just to kind of survive day to day. I would say one of the things that got us through that, and this was so important, is that we had another couple with 4 kids, and twice a year we spotted each other. We would take their 4 kids for a whole weekend, and then they would take our 4 kids. And for us to be able to get away for a whole weekend and just kind of pour into and care for our marriage was so critical to get through that period. I mean, just another couple in the church that we could do that with each other. And while it was hard when we had 8 kids in our home, right, when we were watching their 4 kids, we knew our weekend was coming, right? And boy, that just having that little bit of oasis hanging out there that we would have, that helped us get through those really stressful years. And they weren't all terrible. I mean, it was demanding, it was challenging. Frankly, I wouldn't want to go back to that. I don't know how we had the energy to do some of that now, looking back. But God gets you through it, right? And you learn and you adapt and cope.
You've mentioned it a few times, respite care. It's normal for a family to have respite. And it's really important for families who are fostering to adopt. You know, respite is necessary. So as you're listening to this story, and multiple people who've been on the podcast before have fostered, adopted, being a village could be offering respite to a family. So just being that other couple who was willing to watch the children, and you know, mutually agreeing to that, that's a great way to be the village. That could be your part on the river.
Right on. That huge way of helping a family deal with some of those challenges, the stresses that they're going through, to have an evening away,
Right.
provided they're not talking about the kids, right? Where they can just allow themselves that space or a weekend. Tremendous benefit to that. Absolutely, Allison. Yeah.
So I'm from the Philadelphia area, and I know multiple people who sort of wrestle with the similar thing that you and Cheryl wrestled with of, is it even right to have our own kids when there are so many kids who are waiting for families? Would you be comfortable going into that at all?
I'm talking about
your experience and kind of getting to that decision?
Yeah. It's been 34 years since we wrestled with that.
Fair enough.
But all I can say is I think we felt free as we prayed about it together. That was something that we were free to do, right? I don't think everybody is or should, but I think we felt free to see whether or not we would actually have biological children. Right? When you go into marriage, you don't know what's going to happen there. But we're glad we did, right? Those kids have been a blessing to us, no doubt. But as we talked and prayed about, we just felt like that was something we had an opportunity to do as well, right? Gosh, I can't imagine life without those two kids, right? That we had, our son and daughter, who were a blessing in and of themselves too. But I think that's one of those things each family has to sort that out together, right? Talk it out, be on the same page, make sure there's consensus between the husband and wife in sorting that out. And it's between you and God to sort that out and your spouse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey friends, let's talk about real impact. Imagine a single mom struggling to keep her family together, or a child sleeping on the floor because they don't have a bed. Now imagine you being able to meet that need. That's exactly what happens every day through Care Portal.
Care Portal is a platform that connects real-time needs from local children and families to people like you, churches and individuals who want to make a difference. With just a few clicks, you can step in, meet a need, and build a meaningful connection that changes lives.
This isn't just charity. It's the church and the community coming together, showing up in love and action. So if you're ready to turn compassion into action, visit careportal.org and see how you can be a part of the movement, because connection changes everything.
Visit careportal.org for more information on how to sign up and start meeting the needs of children and families in your own zip code. Once again, that's careportal.org.
Thank you, Care Portal, for sponsoring the Mended Futures podcast. Tell us about what you believe the church's role in meeting the needs of children and families in our community. Where does the church fall?
Yeah. Well, I think our job as believers, I'm going to maybe do just the individual thing here as opposed to the collective thing, is that we're supposed to respond to the needs of everybody that comes into our church, and to see them, to treat them with utmost respect and care and love. And so we're going to meet the most important, powerful needs that every one of us has and actually craves, just by noticing and attending to the people that are there. And sometimes that's loving the kids and the families that are struggling with are within our churches, right? We'll get to the people outside of the church in a moment. But I think that's first and foremost who we have an opportunity to care and love. And that means if you see the single mom who's really struggling, or the single dad who's trying to be a good parent, how do you come alongside of them and support them, right? I know a lot of single moms have benefited from having men in the church come alongside their kids, right? Especially if it's possible that her spouse passed away or is no longer meaningfully in the picture at all within her kids' lives. And so for her essentially to have a father figure actively involved in her kids makes a tremendous difference. Some churches, like my former church in Philadelphia, did a fabulous job of caring for kids with special needs, right? So kids that struggled, that families couldn't take their kids to other churches because of their kids being on the spectrum, because they were foster kids and maybe were struggled with their behavior. That church geared up and said, we're going to be the church for those families that have kids with special needs. And what a beautiful expression of Christ's love for those families, right? But in terms of families outside of the church, it's telling that God looks at and constantly says, there's 4 groups of people that I care a whole bunch about. And he keeps coming back to the widows, the orphans, or fatherless, the poor, and the stranger, people who came from outside of your country. He keeps going back: the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the stranger, the alien. And why does he do that? Because God loves the little person. He loves the person who is most vulnerable in our society. And he says again and again, I think it's 44 times in Scripture that he says, in terms of the fatherless or the orphan, care for these kids, provide for these kids, love these kids, bring them into your community, because, he doesn't say this in Scripture, but because they are vulnerable. They're most vulnerable. And I think that's the place for the church, is that we are to find who is most vulnerable and make a concerted effort to say, how in the world do we, whatever that means, and each church can have its own role there of making sure we're addressing those needs of the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the vulnerable, the alien. And that's our job. That's our job as a church. That's I think we talk about that as the social gospel, right? And some people say, well, that's the social gospel. Well, we're evangelical. We want to proclaim the gospel. Absolutely. Right? So how do we proclaim the gospel and meet the needs of people in our community with profound love? And I would suggest, I think it's St. Francis who said, preach the gospel every day and sometimes even use words. But I think there's a way to do both of these, right? Proclaim the gospel, be confident that the gospel is transformative in our life when we understand that the God of the universe loves us, right? Went to the ends of the earth to make us his kids, to adopt us as his kids, as it says in Ephesians 1:5, and was willing to atone for our sins, right? We were his enemy, and he made us his friend through Christ's work on the cross. And we get to live that out, right? And do this reconciliation thing that our organization is all about. Help heal the rifts, the brokenness that's in our communities, in these relationships that seem impossible to redeem. But we get to play a role in that. And so that's the church's responsibility, certainly parachurch organizations like FIVE18 to play as well.
Well, that's a great transition into our next question. We've been talking to various members of the senior leadership team today, episodes that have played out over the last few weeks, probably, once they end up going out. And we've been talking to each of you about what becoming 518 means to you personally, what 2 Corinthians 5:18 means to you personally. And I have a follow-up question about the exciting announcement that that came out last month or last year, I guess, at this point. But yeah, what does becoming 518 mean to you?
Yeah. A lot of things. I'm going to pick out 2 things that I think are important to me. I mean, for one, it's our stake in the ground that says we are unabashedly faith-based in who we are as an organization. But even as I say that, somebody asked me, does that mean you only serve folks who are Christians? And it's like, no, right? It's our motivation for who we are, for why we do what we do. But we'll serve anybody, right? In the same way that Christ served anybody, right? He just loved on people, wherever they were. So that's part of it, is that we're saying this is really important to us. It's our driving motivation. And we use the limitless strength of God to do the work that we do, even when it's really hard some days, right? We want to give up. Nope, we don't, because God keeps giving us enough strength for that day. And the other part of it is, I think the becoming part is that, and it's the part we're leaning into more, is that this highly collaborative We want to work with other organizations because we recognize that there's no way we're going to address this huge need of vulnerable families and kids within our community unless we're working closely with other organizations. I've had so many professionals say here who know the nonprofit world is that we have a lot of nonprofits. We're resource rich when it comes to nonprofits, but our coordination across the nonprofits is just not where it needs to be. I think there's been some growth and some improvements. I think some people are recognizing that, and that's exciting to see that. But if we're going to address some of the most persistent, challenging issues that our community faces, it's going to be because we're willing to drop our egos at the door and say, how do we do this stuff together, right? Where if you get the credit, fantastic, right? I don't need to keep boasting about what we do when you're doing a great job too, right? And if we can be that organization that can help do that increasingly, I think that's where our best results are going to happen, right? Where we're finding new solutions together in coordinated fashion rather than this kind of weird thing that we all try to do our own thing, and it doesn't serve our families well, or it doesn't serve our community well. So,
how will the new 518 building give the opportunity for further collaboration? How do you think that announcement will give life to the community?
Yeah. I think, well, it's a lot more space than we currently have, right? And there's going to be this event space that I think we're going to be able to make available to a lot of different organizations. Frankly, to bring us all together, right? Right now, we couldn't possibly bring many people together here. But it's going to be space we're going to be able to say, use it, right? This is great for you to use, but also space that we can bring people together intentionally around collaborative efforts, coordinated work together with other organizations. We have all kinds of dreams, and you all are a part of those, of how we might possibly use this. And how it's going to all work, I don't know. I think I have this idea what it's going to look like, and we're going to get into it, and we're going to start bringing other partnering organizations and said, how can this space be used in a way that blesses you, as well as us? And I guess that's the other part of becoming 518 I didn't mention before, but this idea of being a go-giving organization, not just how do we tend to our own needs, right? But how do we continue to bless other organizations with the resources that God has given us? That's the cool stuff. So how that all plays out, we're in the dreaming phase right now. I think we have some ideas of what that's going to look like, but ask me that question in about 3 to 5 years and I'll have a much better answer for you. Yeah.
We'll pencil you in.
Okay.
We'll see what we can do. You'll have a lot more free time then, because you'll be Dr. Nitz at that point.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. That's the hope.
I would love to know your experience and your perspective of the senior leadership team, because we've asked each of you about the others, and it's just really fun to hear you guys talk about each other. And
it's a unique style of leadership. How did you all get to this point?
Yeah. And the verb that's been created from your last name and how you feel about it.
I'm Jeff Nitz, and so does his mother. We have a nice vibe going. We really do. And I would say, I think a lot of that has been because Mr. Day is willing to share power, right? I mean, he just is, right? And you've probably heard his way of saying we're not going to do things unless we're all in agreement. And that's a big move by a CEO, right? That's a big move. And I think there's, frankly, I think we practice coaching peace pretty well with each other, right? There's tense moments, but we work it through. And if there's something sitting, we work it through. And over time, then you create trust, and you trust each other's perspective, that there's something you're seeing that I'm not seeing yet, and that's all really useful. We just kind of enjoy each other's different perspective, recognizing, and this is the beautiful thing, right? In any kind of body or group, is that if you can trust that You're all together with your different perspectives and different gifts. It's going to make this whole group be more effective if we draw that out. If any one person says, "I got what it takes," I know it all or whatever, then we got problems, right? That doesn't usually work out so well. But everybody contributes in that team, in the SLT team, in a really unique way, and it works really well for us. Yeah, but I'd say it starts with Mr. Day's willingness to share power.
What's your role on the team? What do you do when somebody comes in with another new idea?
Yeah, that brake pedal. I keep pressing
the emergency brake if you have to.
Yeah. Because a few people on the team, all gas, no brakes.
Yeah.
Yes, precisely.
It was scary when I first came on. Where's the brake pedal, please?
Yeah. Because you're the COO, you're the money guy too.
That's a role that I have, right? Which is about, people say that it's about sustainability and stewardship, right? That's I want us to be successful 10, 20, 30 years down the road, right? And so that means making sure we're making wise financial decisions now so that in the long haul, we're able to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. So that's where my brain goes. And so this may work today. You asked the question about what my role is. My question often is to ask questions, right? My father-in-law taught me the value of process. And so if you want a good result, and he was an engineer, chem engineer, you have to ask the right questions now. You have to set up the right process now to get the right results that you want in the end. And a lot of that I learned over time is asking questions, right? Let's just think this through. Let's ponder it together so that when we say yes to something, we've thought through it all, right? Or a decent portion of the things that we can possibly see. And anyway, that's my role, is maybe slow the process down a little bit, ask a few more questions so that when we say let's go, we've thought through a few contingency plans and maybe altered the plan a little bit so it has an even better chance of success.
And sustainability and stewardship is huge when you're talking about a nonprofit.
Oh yeah,
absolutely huge.
Yeah. Right. There's this one parable where Jesus says, I think he's talking about somebody who was building a tower, right? And I'm guessing it was only half built, and he didn't have enough to finish the tower, right? And that day, I'm sure they knew what they were talking about, right? Old Joe over there, and I don't like building stuff that isn't going to be around, right, for quite some time, right? I mean, you're going to have failures along the way, right? But there ought to be prudent failures along the way. That's how I look at things.
So the title of this podcast is the Mended Futures Podcast.
First off, are you a product of a mended future?
My first thought is, aren't we all? Right? I've thought a lot of times, if you'd put me in a different family, in a different situation, who knows where I would have ended up, right? I was blessed to have two parents who were faithful and true to each other, who pointed us to the Lord, who provided for us 7 kids in my family, right? Didn't do it perfectly, right? We joke about, as siblings, we joke about the mistakes that mom and dad made. But I was blessed to have that. Which is way better than lots of kids experience it in terms of starting off. But at any point, right? And then not only that, but God gave me a wise and godly wife, right? Who, has helped me figure out a lot about life and dealt with my own insecurities and things. And so what a good gift there. And all along the way, friends and people. And I think all of our lives are kind of a reflection of who knows where we would have ended up had God not put different people in our lives along the way and different experiences. to keep us from going off the rails, right? Or if we did all go off the rails, to get back on, right? And I think that's the story of redemption. I'd like to think that all of us can see and recognize. It's not just me because I'm so, got it all together. No, right? It's just one story after another of God's redemptive work in our lives. And I think that's the cool story that we're all hopefully going to tell, each with its own little facet and nuance to it. But that's the exciting part, I think. I wish we could spend more time just sharing with each other. Let me tell you about this, right? Again, what God did here. And it's not about me. It's not about, right? It's what God has been doing in our lives that is shaping us and moving us more and more into Christ-likeness. And that's the big story that is where I'm going to be able to tell at some point.
I love what you said towards the beginning of this conversation about how you really have to watch things over a longer period of time. And you, at the time, you feel called or you have an epiphany or, why did you end up taking that job in Philadelphia? You thought it was going to be a year and it turned into an entire career. You don't see those things in 6 months. Oftentimes you might in 6 years or 60 years.
Right.
So I think it's important to look at things over a longer period of time. I want to add to the question about Mended Futures. You have adult children now. Do you have grandchildren?
I do.
Okay. Are you seeing things through your adult children and your grandchildren that are examples of Mended Futures?
So my oldest daughter has 4 kids. One of those kids I don't get to spend a lot of time with, but 3 I do. And I look at her life and I think what she went through as a kid and what she's offered to her kids compared to what she experienced is just profound to me, right? You hope you might be one rung up the ladder in terms of creating a healthy environment for the next generation, right? And if we're fortunate, we might be able to do that. I'm one rung better. I don't mean just financially, right? Or what? It's right, creating a healthy experience for the next generation, leaving a positive legacy, that much more so maybe. And I look at her and I think it's night and day what she experienced versus what she's now offering to her kids in terms of stability and the care of a husband in her life and what her kids are experiencing in terms of committed, faithful love from their mom. I mean, it's powerful stuff. The start she's giving her kids, some of whom are 1 and 2 are in college now, is just profound to me. And I get to have front row and watching all that happen. And I mean, that's pretty cool stuff.
In a relatively short period of time.
Oh.
In a generation.
In one generation. Yeah. Yeah. It's
You sowed the seeds.
Yeah. Little ways, right? Little things we did. But mostly we just get to watch. I mean, Cheryl and I will say, I can't believe, we'll just pinch each other. So we get to watch what that young woman is doing, right? Who's not so young anymore, but I mean, again and again and again, it's exciting to see with a little bit of faithfulness and God doing remarkable things in one generation, to your point. One generation, there's profound differences, and that's pretty exciting stuff.
I think that's hopeful for people listening who are sowing the seeds right now.
Yeah.
That in one generation, you can see remarkable improvement.
And it didn't look like that in those teenage years. It looked hopeless. Right? And I would want families to know that may be in the midst of those years where you think, oh, this is not going to end well. There's no way this is going to end well. But then God does his thing, right? God does his thing. You know, we planted seeds in terms of faith, but it was somebody who laid a track down on a table that my daughter served as a waitstaff person that got her going to a church, and that was a significant change in her life, right? And all of a sudden, I think things connected and clicked for her in her late 20s to say, oh my gosh, maybe I need to head a different direction here. And that was the start of something beautiful, right? Who would have figured that kind of a thing? And there we go.
Wow.
So really neat stories.
Yeah.
But you got to hang around long enough and trust that God's working long enough to see the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, right? There's good stories coming. You just have to have faith and trust that God's doing his thing.
And life is messy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm listening. We were just talking about this a little while ago. I'm listening to a different translation of the Bible. And my daughter walked in the other day and she said, "What are you listening to?" There are biblical stories that are incredibly messy.
Oh,
Life is messy.
Yeah.
History is messy.
Yeah.
And if the mess makes you feel uncomfortable, you might miss the miracle.
Right. Right. I'm reading through Genesis here recently.
Oh,
it's like,
Same.
whoa.
Wow.
Right.
That's what
Jesus is the product of some really messy backstories here, right?
That's what I was listening to the other day, and my daughter walked in and said, "What are you listening to?"
Right.
Lot was up to some stuff for sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's important to understand human nature is human nature, and we have been given the opportunity to reconcile from some bad choices. All of us.
Everyone.
All of us do.
Yep.
And when life gets messy, you can either dig in and stay, or you can tune out.
Yep.
But you might miss something.
Right on.
And you'll always run into something else messy. Or no matter where you turn, there's something to run from.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's coming. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say to the people listening before we finish up?
I'm glad you listened to this edition of Mended Future. It's been great to do this with you guys.
We've enjoyed it. Thanks for
Yes.
taking the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Mended Futures podcast, hosted by Allison Jordan and Taylor Melvin, produced by Liam Chafin, Sue England, Allison Jordan, Robert Day, Sully Jugar, and Taylor Melvin. You can find us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to see more.